The night shift lights hummed softly above the marble lobby, casting pale reflections across floors so clean they looked unreal. Outside, rain streaked the glass like tears that refused to fall. Ethan Carter pushed his janitor's cart slowly, one hand guiding the mop, the other tucked deep into his jacket pocket, where his phone buzzed again. Another message from a hospital he couldn't afford to ignore. Somewhere, several floors above him, executives argued over a crisis worth $100 million. Down here, Ethan's world was quieter but heavier. He paused, staring at his own reflection in the polished stone, breathing in, as if bracing for something he didn't yet know was about to change everything. Before we go any further, tell me, where are you watching this from right now? It still amazes me how one quiet story can travel across continents and hearts. Drop your city below. Let's see how far this moment reaches. Ethan hadn't planned to stay late that night. He never did. Every extra minute in the building meant one less minute at home with Lily, his 8-year-old daughter, asleep with her science book open on her chest. But a call had come in, an emergency cleaning request on the executive floors. Something about spilled coffee, frantic pacing, and raised voices. Overtime pay was small, but hospital bills were not. He rode the service elevator up, the metal doors closing with a dull thud. As it climbed, his thoughts drifted not to money, but to Lily's laugh that morning when he burned the toast again. "It's okay, Dad," she'd said, brushing crumbs into her hand. "We're still a good team." That word, team, stayed with him. The elevator opened onto chaos. Men and women in tailored suits moved fast, their shoes clicking sharply against the floor. A whiteboard was filled with numbers, circled in red. Someone slammed a folder down. Someone else swore under their breath. Ethan kept his head low, pushing his cart toward a spill near the conference room doors. He wasn't invisible, but he was practiced at being unnoticed. Inside the room, a tall man with silver hair stood rigid at the head of the table. Michael Harrington, CO. Ethan knew the name from the plaques downstairs. Harrington's voice cut through the air. "If this merger collapses by morning, we don't just lose a deal, we lose the company's future." Ethan's hand froze on the mop handle. He didn't mean to listen. He never meant to. But words like system failure, data mismatch, and algorithm loop drifted out, colliding with something deep in Ethan's memory. Years ago, before his wife passed, before life narrowed, Ethan had been a systems analyst. He'd built models like these. He'd lived inside problems like this. He swallowed hard and kept cleaning. As he wiped the spill, a junior executive burst out of the room, running a hand through her hair. Grace. Her badge said so. She stopped short when she nearly collided with Ethan's cart. "Sorry," she muttered, distracted. Then, almost to herself, "None of this makes sense. The numbers shouldn't be bleeding like this." Ethan hesitated. His heart began to pound, not with fear, but recognition. He glanced at the whiteboard through the glass. A pattern flickered in his mind. A simple one. Painfully simple. "Ma'am," he said quietly. Grace barely looked at him. "I'm kind of in the middle of..." "The loss curve," Ethan continued, voice steady despite his shaking hands. "It's not real loss, it's duplication." She frowned despite herself. "What did you say?" Ethan straightened, meeting her eyes. Years of being overlooked pressed against his chest. "You're counting the same transaction twice. Once on entry, once on reconciliation. It creates a loop. Looks catastrophic, but it's just echo." Silence stretched. Grace turned fully toward him now. "How would you know that?" Ethan gestured gently toward the board. "Because if you reverse the reconciliation order and isolate the timestamp, the bleed disappears." She stared at him, stunned, then she ran back into the room. Ethan stood alone in the hallway, suddenly aware of his racing pulse, the ache in his feet, the weight of what he'd just done. He almost pushed his cart away, almost fled, but something held him there. Minutes later, the conference room door flew open. Michael Harrington himself stepped out, eyes sharp, scanning the hall until they landed on Ethan. The room behind him was silent now. No arguing, no pacing. Just shock. "You," the CEO said slowly. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he replied. "Ethan Carter." Harrington studied him. Not his uniform, but his face. "Come inside." Ethan hesitated, then followed. The door closing behind him as dozens of eyes turned his way. He felt small, but not wrong. As he approached the board, something inside him settled, like a long-forgotten part of himself waking up. He lifted his hand, ready to explain, just as his phone vibrated again in his pocket, reminding him of the fragile line between the world he'd left behind and the one now staring at him, waiting. And as Ethan opened his mouth to speak, the rain outside intensified, drumming harder against the glass, as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether one quiet janitor's voice would be enough to change the fate of an entire company. Ethan cleared his throat, the sound barely audible in the vast conference room. The executives sat frozen, some with arms crossed, others gripping pens like lifelines. Michael Harrington stepped aside, giving Ethan space at the board, a small gesture, but one that felt impossibly large. "Go on," the CEO said, his voice controlled, almost cautious. Ethan lifted a marker. His fingers trembled at first, then steadied. As he drew a single line to the tangled mess of numbers, his mind slipped back into an old rhythm. Years ago, he'd stood in rooms like this, not in coveralls, but in press shirts, explaining systems to people who nodded politely without always understanding. That version of him felt distant now, like a photograph left too long in the sun. "The system flags each transaction twice," Ethan said. "Once when it enters a pipeline, and again when it sinks across departments. It's supposed to cancel out, but tonight it didn't." Grace leaned forward. "Because of the update?" Ethan nodded. "The update changed the timestamp priority. The system thinks the second entry is new data, so it panics. And so do you." A few uneasy breaths rippled around the table. Michael's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but focus. "And the fix?" Ethan erased a small section. "You don't need to rebuild. Just isolate the reconciliation layer, roll back the timestamp priority, and rerun validation. 10 minutes. Maybe less." Silence again, thicker this time. Finally, Michael looked at his team. "Do it. Now." Chair scraped. Laptop snapped open. Fingers flew across keyboards. No one questioned Ethan. Not anymore. He stepped back, suddenly unsure where to put his hands. He folded them behind his back like he did when he waited in hospital corridors. The glow of the screens reflected in his eyes as lines of code scrolled by. Each second felt heavy. He thought of Lily's sneakers by the door at home, one lace always longer than the other. He wondered if she was dreaming. Then Grace gasped softly. "The bleed, it's stopping." Another voice followed, lost curve flattening. A third, almost laughing. "We're stabilizing." Michael exhaled, slow and deep, like a man who'd been underwater too long. He turned to Ethan. "You just saved us $100 million. The words landed awkwardly. Ethan didn't smile. He didn't know how. Instead, he nodded once, as if accepting a fact rather than praise. Michael extended his hand. Ethan hesitated, then shook it. The CEO's grip was firm, warm. "Human, if you were standing there, watching someone step forward like that, what would you have done?" The narration pauses gently here. "Would you have spoken up, or stayed quiet like most of us do? Be honest. Share your answer in the comments. And if you don't have the words, just tap like to show that courage still matters." The room slowly emptied. Crisis replaced by stunned relief. Executives murmured to one another, glancing back at Ethan as if afraid he might vanish. Grace stayed behind, her expression softer now. "Why are you cleaning floors?" she asked carefully. Ethan shrugged. "Life happens." Michael watched him for a long moment. "Life doesn't erase skill," he said. "It just hides it sometimes." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He checked his phone again. 3 missed calls. His face drained of color. "My daughter," he said quietly. "She's in the hospital. I should go." Michael nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Grace, get him a ride." "No," Ethan said quickly. "I take the bus." Michael's voice was firm now. "Not tonight." The car ride was silent, city lights streaking past windows. Ethan stared out, replaying the night in fragments. The board, the numbers, the handshake. It felt unreal, like a story someone else would tell. At the hospital, the smell of antiseptic wrapped around him. He found Lily's room and froze in the doorway. She lay small beneath white sheets, her hair fanned across the pillow. Machines beeped softly, steady and patient. Lily opened her eyes when she sensed him. "Dad!" "I'm here," he whispered, crossing the room in 2 strides. He took her hand, warm and fragile. "I'm sorry I'm late." She smiled weakly. "Did you fix the big problem?" Ethan swallowed. "Yeah, kiddo. I did." She squeezed his fingers. "I knew you would." Later, when she slept again, Ethan sat alone, head bowed. He thought about how close he'd come to saying nothing, to mopping the spill and riding the elevator back down. The thought made his stomach twist. Outside the room, footsteps approached. Michael Harrington stood there, coat over his arm, suddenly just a man in a hallway. "I had someone run your file," he said quietly. "Your past work, your education. You shouldn't have disappeared." Ethan looked up, eyes tired. "I didn't disappear. I adapted." Michael nodded. "Then maybe it's time the world adapts back." He placed a card on the table. "When your daughter's better, come see me." As Michael walked away, Ethan stared at the card, then back at Lily. The machines continued their gentle rhythm. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a closed door. It felt paused, waiting. And as dawn began to creep through the hospital window, pale and uncertain, Ethan leaned back in the chair, unaware that the hardest part of his journey, the part that would test his heart more than his mind, was still quietly approaching. Morning arrived without ceremony. No triumphant music, no applause, just a soft shuffle of nurses changing shifts in sunlight inching across the hospital floor. Ethan woke with a stiff neck and the imprint of a plastic chair pressed into his skin. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he heard the machines. Then he saw Lily. She was still sleeping, her chest rising and falling in shallow, steady breaths. Relief washed over him, quiet and powerful. He stood, stretching slowly, and walked to the window. Below, the city was already awake. People rushing to jobs they complained about, chasing problems they thought defined them. He'd been one of them once. Maybe he still was. The doctor came in an hour later. Calm voice, measured words. "The infection is responding. She's not out of the woods, but she's improving." Ethan nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He thanked the doctor anyway, twice. Gratitude spilled out of him these days, uncontrolled, like he was afraid it might run out. By noon, Lily was awake and asking for apple juice. By evening, she was arguing about homework. Normal returned in small pieces. But inside Ethan, something had shifted. The card Michael Harrington left sat heavy in his pocket. He'd taken it out at least a dozen times, tracing the raised letters with his thumb. A future, an invitation, a risk. Grace called that night. "I hope this isn't strange," she said, her voice careful. "But we've been talking. About you." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's usually strange, yeah?" She laughed softly. "Michael wants you to come in, not as a favor, as a consultant. Short-term, flexible, paid. Paid." The word landed differently now. Not excitement, fear. Hope always scared him more than disappointment. "I don't know," he said. "My daughter." "We know," Grace interrupted gently. "That's why it's flexible. You set the terms." After the call ended, Ethan sat beside Lily's bed, watching her color crooked stars on a sheet of paper. She looked up at him suddenly. "You're thinking loud again," she said. He chuckled. "Am I that obvious?" She nodded. "Is it about the job?" Ethan blinked. "How do you—" "You always think loud when something could feel scary," she said simply. Then she shrugged. "I think you should do it." He stared at her. "Why?" "Because you smile more when you fix things," she said. "Even big, boring things." Something broke open in his chest then. He hugged her carefully, mindful of wires and tubes. "You're wiser than most adults I know." She grinned. "I know." Have you ever had someone believe in you before you believed in yourself? If that's happened to you, write yes in the comments. And if you feel like it, share their name. Sometimes gratitude deserves to be spoken out loud. 2 weeks later, Ethan walked back into the building, not through the service entrance, but the front doors. He wore a borrowed blazer and shoes that pinched. The lobby looked the same, but he didn't feel invisible anymore. Some people nodded. One smiled. Recognition flickered in their eyes. Michael met him upstairs. No speeches, no dramatics, just a quiet handshake and a simple, "We're glad you're here." Ethan worked from a small office near a window. He fixed systems. He explained problems without jargon. People listened. Slowly, he felt pieces of himself return. Confidence, purpose, a voice. But not everyone was pleased. There was resistance. Subtle at first. A missed meeting invite. A dismissive tone. Then comments. "He's not one of us." Temporary. Background hire. Ethan heard them. He pretended not to. Old instincts told him to keep his head down, be grateful, stay small. But every evening, he went home to Lily, stronger now, louder, alive, and something in him refused to shrink anymore. One night, a system flagged again. Smaller issue, but complex. Ethan stayed late, tracing the problem patiently. When he solved it, he realized what it was: another duplication, another echo, this time human. Someone had altered data intentionally, not to fix, but to hide. He brought it to Michael the next morning. Michael listened in silence, jaw tight. "Are you sure?" Ethan nodded. "I checked 3 times. An internal investigation followed. Tension spread. Whispers sharpened. Grace avoided eye contact now, not out of guilt, but fear. The culprit turned out to be someone senior. Trusted. Powerful. The fallout was swift and ugly. Ethan stood on the sidelines, watching careers implode. He felt no satisfaction, only sadness. He understood desperation. He'd lived there. That evening, Michael stopped him before he left. "You did the right thing," he said. Ethan met his eyes. "Right doesn't always feel good." Michael sighed. "No, but it builds something that lasts." On the bus ride home, Ethan watched the city blur past. He thought about integrity, not as a grand idea, but as a series of small, lonely choices. Speak up. Tell the truth. Step forward. When he reached his apartment, Lily ran to him, waving a paper. "Look, I got an A." He lifted her, spinning once. Laughter filled the small room. And in that moment, simple, ordinary, warm, Ethan felt the weight of the past loosen its grip. Not gone, but lighter. Still, as he tucked Lily into bed, a question lingered in his mind. One that whispered just before sleep claimed him. Was redemption something you earned or something you dared to accept? The answer, though he didn't know it yet, was waiting, along with a test that would demand more forgiveness than he thought he had left. The test arrived quietly, disguised as routine. It was a Thursday afternoon when Ethan was asked to sit in on a meeting he hadn't been invited to before. Senior leadership. Closed doors. The kind of room where decisions hardened into policy. Michael sat at the head of the table, hands folded, expression unreadable. Around him, faces Ethan recognized, some friendly, some carefully neutral. "Ethan," Michael said, "we're reviewing restructuring options." That word, restructuring, carried weight. Ethan felt it settle in his stomach as he took a seat near the end of the table. A man named Robert Klein began speaking. Polished, confident. "Given recent events," he said, "we need to stabilize perception. Investors are nervous. We need reassurance." Charts appeared on the screen. Cost centers. Reductions. Support roles circled neatly. Ethan recognized the pattern before the words came. "We're proposing outsourcing custodial and night maintenance," Robert continued. "Significant savings. Minimal impact." Minimal impact. Ethan's jaw tightened. His mind flashed to the service elevator. Terrain against glass. To himself, pushing a cart unseen. To men and women who cleaned after everyone left, who kept the building alive in invisible ways. Michael glanced at Ethan. Just once. Not a warning. An invitation. Robert went on. Frankly, these roles don't add strategic value. Silence pressed down on the room. Ethan felt his pulse in his ears. He could stay quiet. He was no longer one of them. Not officially. He could protect his fragile place, his income, his daughter's security. But the faces of the night staff rose in his mind. Maria, who brought extra gloves for winter. James, who worked 2 jobs and still hummed while he cleaned. People who never got invited into rooms like this. Ethan inhaled. They saved this company, he said. Heads turned. Robert frowned. Excuse me? Ethan's voice didn't waver. The night staff, custodial, maintenance. They're the reason you had a building to panic in that night. They're the reason I was there. And I was only there because of them. A few murmurs rippled. Robert scoffed. That's sentimental, not strategic. Ethan leaned forward. It's strategic to understand your systems, human ones included. Cut the people who know your building best, who spot problems before alarms do. And you don't save money. You delay disaster. Michael said nothing. He watched. Ethan continued, surprised by his own calm. I'm here because someone once decided my role didn't matter. And it almost cost you everything. The room held its breath. Robert glanced at Michael. We're running a business. So am I, Ethan replied. Every day. I run a household on a razor's edge. And I can tell you, when you strip away the people who hold things together quietly, collapse doesn't come loudly. It comes suddenly. Silence. Michael finally spoke. Thank you, Ethan. The meeting adjourned without a decision. Outside, Grace caught up with him. Her eyes were wide. That was brave, she whispered. And dangerous. Ethan nodded. I know. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Doubt crept in, sharp and persistent. He replayed the meeting, wondering if he'd crossed an invisible line. If he just talked himself out of a future he couldn't afford to lose. The next morning, an email arrived. Subject: staffing review outcome. His hands trembled as he opened it. The proposal had been rejected. Instead, funding was approved for internal training and cross-department communication, starting with night operations, recognition, inclusion, respect. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Later that day, Maria stopped him in the hallway. They told us, she said, eyes shining, about what you said. He smiled softly. I just told the truth. She squeezed his arm. Truth matters when someone's brave enough to say it. Now it's your turn. Think of one small good thing you've done recently. Something kind, even if no one noticed. Share in the comments so others remember that goodness still lives. Your story might be exactly what someone needs tonight. Weeks passed. Lily returned to school. Laughter returned to their apartment. Ethan's role expanded, not in title, but in trust. People sought him out, not just for answers, but for perspective. One evening, as he packed up to leave, Michael stopped by his office. You cost us a few uncomfortable conversations, he said. Ethan smiled faintly. I figured. Michael's expression softened. You also saved us from making a mistake we'd regret for years. He hesitated. I want to offer you something permanent. The word landed heavy. Permanent mais stability. Health insurance. Security. It also meant stepping fully into a world Ethan wasn't sure would ever truly accept him. I need time, Ethan said. Of course, Michael replied. Take it. That night, Ethan walked home instead of taking the bus. The air was cool, the city quieter. He passed the building where he used to clean and looked up at the lit windows. Somewhere inside, someone was working late, unaware of how fragile everything really was. At home, Lily was asleep on the couch, homework scattered around her. He covered her with a blanket and sat beside her, watching her breathe. He thought about forgiveness, not of others, but of himself. For the years he believed he was only what life left him with. As he turned off the light, a question followed him into the dark. If you're finally seen, do you risk being known? The answer was coming. It would ask more of his heart than any system ever had. The reveal didn't arrive with drama. No raised voices. No sudden music swelling in the background. It came the way truth often does. Quietly, devastating in its simplicity. Ethan found out on a Tuesday morning. He'd just finished a call with Lily's school when Grace appeared at his door, her face pale, eyes uncertain. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. He nodded, sensing something off. They walked down the hall to a small conference room. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin lines, striping the table like a warning. Grace closed the door behind them and sat, folding her hands tightly. "The investigation," she said carefully. "The one you helped trigger a few weeks ago." Ethan leaned back. "What about it?" Grace swallowed. "The senior executive who altered the data. His name hasn't been shared widely yet." Ethan waited. It was Daniel Carter. The room tilted. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. The name echoed, sharp and impossible. "That's not," he stopped himself. Daniel Carter, his older brother. Grace watched him closely now. "Ethan, you know?" He shook his head slowly. "I haven't spoken to him in years." Memories surfaced without permission. Daniel teaching him how to ride a bike. Daniel storming out after their last argument. The one about responsibility, about choices, about Ethan wasting his potential by leaving corporate life to care for his family when his wife got sick. The silence that followed had stretched for nearly a decade. Grace spoke gently. He was under pressure. Gambling debts. Bad investments. He tried to hide losses long enough to recover. It spiraled. Ethan stared at the table. His hands clenched. 1,000 emotions collided. Anger, sorrow, guilt, confusion. He'd exposed corruption without knowing it was tied to his own blood. Michael called him into his office later that afternoon. No formality. No distance. "I wanted you to hear it from me," Michael said. "Daniel resigned this morning. The board agreed not to pursue charges. Conditional. Quiet." Ethan nodded numbly. He always hated asking for help. Michael leaned forward. "This doesn't change how I see you." Ethan laughed once, hollow. "It changes how I see myself." That evening, Ethan stood outside an old apartment building across town. He hadn't been here since before Lily was born. The hallway smelled of dust and old paint. He knocked once. Then again. The door opened slowly. Daniel looked older, smaller, his hair grayer than Ethan remembered. His eyes widened in recognition, then filled with shame. "Ethan," he whispered. They stood there in silence until Daniel stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was bare. Boxes stacked against the wall. No wounds. No photos. "I didn't know," Daniel said quickly, words tumbling out. "I swear, when they said your name, I almost walked out that night. But I thought maybe it was someone else." Ethan said nothing. Daniel sank into a chair. "I ruined everything." Ethan's chest ached. "You didn't ruin me." Daniel looked up, eyes red. "I always thought you were the lucky one. Even when you lost everything, you still had something real." Ethan thought of Lily, of hospital nights, of quiet resilience. Luck had nothing to do with it. Silence filled the space between them, heavy but honest. "I don't expect forgiveness," Daniel said. "I just didn't want you hearing it from the news." Ethan stood, unsure what to do with his hands. Forgiveness felt too big, too soon. But walking away felt like another kind of loss. "I don't know what comes next," Ethan said finally. "For either of us." Daniel nodded. "Me neither." Ethan left without embracing him, without promises, just a pause, a crack where something might grow later. If that moment hit you hard, leave a red heart. Sometimes one small symbol says what our hearts can't put into words. The days that followed were heavy. Ethan moved through work like a shadow, doing what was needed, nothing more. People noticed but didn't pry. Michael gave him space. Grace checked in quietly. At home, Lily sensed a shift. "You're sad, but not crying sad," she observed one night, sitting cross-legged on the couch. "It's the thinking kind." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're very observant." She leaned against him. "Want to tell me?" He considered it. How much truth an 8-year-old could carry. "Someone I love made a bad choice. She thought about that. Does that make them bad? The question landed softly, but deeply. No, Ethan said slowly. It just means they're human. She nodded, satisfied. Then maybe they need help. Ethan kissed the top of her head, emotion rising unexpectedly. Children saw things adults complicated. A letter arrived 2 days later. No return address. Inside, a single page. I'm starting over. Somewhere far. I won't reach out again unless you want me to. I'm sorry for everything. D. Ethan folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not thrown away. Not answered. Just held. He didn't know yet whether forgiveness was something he could offer. But for the first time, he understood that it wasn't weakness holding him back. It was pain. And pain. He was learning, needed time, and something stronger than anger to loosen its grip. That strength would be tested soon. Because the closer Ethan came to healing his own life, the more the past seemed determined to ask one final, impossible question. One that would force him to decide what kind of man he truly wanted to be. The call came on a Sunday evening, just as Ethan was helping Lily with a puzzle at the kitchen table. The pieces were scattered everywhere, bright colors, half-built possibilities. His phone vibrated once. Then again, unknown number. He ignored it at first. Sundays were sacred now, but the buzzing returned persistent, uneasy. He answered. Mr. Carter? A man's voice asked. Professional. Careful. This is St. Vincent's Recovery Center. Ethan's stomach tightened. Yes. We have your brother here, Daniel Carter. He listed you as an emergency contact. The room felt suddenly too small. What happened? He collapsed. Dehydration. Exhaustion. Nothing life-threatening at the moment, the man said. But he's not in good shape, mentally or physically. Ethan closed his eyes. We're calling 'cause, the voice continued, he asked for you. Ethan said nothing. Lily looked up at him, sensing the shift. Dad. He covered the phone. Give me a minute, he told the man, then ended the call. Lily studied his face. It's Uncle Daniel, isn't it? Ethan froze. How do you know that? You think loud when it's family, she said quietly. Ethan sat across from her, hands clasped. The puzzle lay unfinished between them. He's not doing well. She nodded. Are you going to help him? The question pierced deeper than any accusation ever could. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Forgiveness. The word felt heavy, worn, almost unfair. Daniel had made choices. Hurt people. Hurt him. Help didn't erase that. But leaving him alone didn't either. I don't know if I can forgive him yet, Ethan said honestly. Lily tilted her head. Do you have to forgive someone before you help them? Ethan's breath caught. He'd faced boardrooms without fear. Stood up to executives. Solved impossible problems. But this was harder. I guess maybe not, he said softly. She reached across the table and slid a puzzle piece toward him. Then maybe just help. At the recovery center, the air smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Ethan signed in with shaking hands. A nurse led him down a quiet hall and opened a door. Daniel sat on the bed, thinner than before, his face pale. He looked up slowly, disbelief flickering across his features. You came, he whispered. Ethan stood near the door. You asked. Daniel swallowed. I didn't think you would. They sat in silence, the kind that pressed on old wounds. Finally, Daniel spoke. I'm not asking you to fix me. Ethan nodded. Good. I can't. I just didn't want to disappear without someone knowing where I landed. Ethan looked at him then, really looked. Not the brother who judged him. Not the man who fell from grace. Just someone broken, scared, human. I can help you get steady, Ethan said. Food, a place to sleep, treatment. That's it. Daniel's eyes filled. That's more than I deserve. Deserve isn't the point, Ethan replied. Staying alive is. They arranged a short-term plan. Resources. Contact. No signe permanent. Nothing promised. As Ethan left, Daniel called after him. I'm proud of you. Ethan paused but didn't turn around. I wish you'd said it years ago. So did Daniel. Back at work, Ethan moved through days like he was carrying something fragile. Forgiveness hadn't happened, but something else had. Space. Possibility. Michael noticed. "You're distracted," he said one afternoon. "Family," Ethan replied simply. Michael nodded. "That's the hardest system to debug." They stood by the window, city humming below. Michael spoke again, about the permanent role. "I don't need an answer today, but I do want you to know something." Ethan waited. "You change how this company sees people," Michael said. "Not because you save money, but because you reminded us who matters." Ethan swallowed. "Be honest. The narration leans in gently here. Could you forgive someone after what they did to you? Type forgive if you think you could, or never if it would hurt too deeply." That night, Ethan sat on a balcony while Lily slept inside. The city lights blinked like distant stars. He thought about boundaries, about compassion without self-destruction, about loving someone without losing yourself. He hadn't forgiven Daniel, but he hadn't abandoned him either. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Inside, Lily stirred, murmuring in her sleep. Ethan went to her, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. He brushed hair from her face and whispered, "We're going to be okay." The words weren't a promise. They were a direction. And as the days moved forward, slow and uncertain, Ethan didn't realize he was approaching the quiet resolution, the moment when pain would finally loosen and hope would step forward, asking to be believed in one last time. Resolution didn't come as a single moment. It unfolded quietly, stitched together by ordinary days that no longer felt so heavy. Daniel entered a longer-term program 2 weeks later. Ethan didn't visit every day. He didn't call every night. He learned slowly that support didn't mean sacrifice. It meant steadiness. When Daniel left a voicemail just to say he'd made it through another day sober, Ethan listened twice, then saved it. Not as proof, as hope. At work, the company changed in small but visible ways. Night staff were invited to town halls. Maintenance reports were taken seriously. Break rooms were renovated, not with luxury, but dignity. People noticed. Productivity rose. So did morale. One afternoon, Ethan found Maria waiting outside his office. She held a small paper bag. "We made these," she said shyly. "For you and Lily." Inside were empanadas, still warm. Ethan smiled, touched beyond words. "Thank you." She hesitated. "You didn't just speak for us. You saw us." After she left, Ethan sat alone, holding the bag like it was something sacred. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that his voice had done more than fix systems. It had shifted a culture. The permanent offer came again. This time, in writing. Senior Systems Integrity Lead. Ethan laughed softly at the title. He read the benefits, the salary, the flexibility clause Michael insisted on adding himself. That night, he placed a letter on the table between 2 plates of spaghetti. Lily twirled her fork, watching him. "You're doing the thinking thing again," she said. He nodded. "They want me to stay." Officially, her eyes lit up. "Does that mean fewer night shifts?" "Yes." "And more school pickups?" "Yes." She grinned. "Then why are you scared?" Ethan considered the question. "Because staying means believing this isn't temporary." She thought about that, then shrugged. Good things don't have to leave. He signed the letter the next morning. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. The city warmed. Lily grew stronger, louder, faster. She joined a science club, built a model bridge that held more weight than anyone expected. Ethan watched her explain it proudly, hands moving just like his once did at whiteboards. Daniel sent a postcard from the recovery center. Just a lake. A sentence. "Still here. Still trying." Ethan placed it beside the letter in the drawer. On the anniversary of the crisis, Michael asked Ethan to speak at a company gathering. No spotlight, no stage, just a room full of people. Ethan stood there, hands steady now. "I didn't save this company," he said. "A lot of people did. I just happened to be listening." The room was quiet, not awkward, respectful. "Systems fail," he continued, "but people notice. And when they do, we have a choice to look away, or to step in. He stepped back to applause that felt less like praise and more like understanding. Later that evening, Ethan and Lily walked home together. The sky glowed pink and gold. She skipped ahead, then turned back suddenly. "Dad!" "Yeah, I think Uncle Daniel is going to be okay." Ethan smiled. "I think so too." "If you believe love still wins," the narration whispers softly now. Comment, amen. Let's fill this space with hope, because somewhere, someone scrolling tonight needs to see it. At home, Ethan tucked Lily in, listening as she recounted her day in careful detail. When she finally drifted off, he sat beside her bed a moment longer, just breathing. He thought about hope, not as a feeling, but as a practice. Showing up, speaking up, staying. He wasn't the man he used to be. He was better. And as he turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, a calm settled over him. The kind that didn't promise perfection, only purpose. The kind that said the hardest chapters were behind him, and the story was finally ready to rest. Just beyond the quiet, one last truth waited to be spoken, softly, gently, like a hand on the shoulder before goodbye. The building was quieter than usual that evening, the kind of hush that came after something important had already happened. Ethan stood alone in the lobby, lights dimmed to a soft glow, watching reflections ripple across the polished floor. Months ago, this was where he'd pushed a cart, shoulders rounded, heart heavy. Tonight, he stood still, not because he was unnoticed, but because he was finally at peace. Outside, rain began again, gentle this time, cleansing. He thought about how close he'd come to staying silent that night, about how easily life could have continued on the same narrow path, working, surviving, shrinking. Redemption hadn't arrived as a reward. It had arrived as a responsibility. His phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. 1 year sober today. Thank you for not turning away. Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Proud of you. Keep going. No grand speeches. No reopening guns. Just two brothers, moving forward in their own imperfect ways." At home, Lily was at the kitchen table, carefully writing something on a folded piece of paper. She looked up when Ethan came in. "Don't peek," she warned. He raised his hands. "I wouldn't dare." She finished, folded it again, and slid it across to him. "You can read it now." Inside, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "My dad fixes big things and small things. He never gives up on people. I want to be like him." Ethan's vision blurred. He sat down slowly, holding the paper like it might disappear if he moved too fast. "Hey," Lily said, suddenly unsure. "Is it okay?" He pulled her into a hug, holding her tighter than usual. "It's more than okay." That night, after she fell asleep, Ethan stood on the balcony again, city lights stretching endlessly before him. He thought about the millions he'd helped save, and how meaningless that number felt compared to this moment, compared to a child who felt safe, a brother who felt supported, a building full of people who now felt seen. Life hadn't become perfect, but it had become honest. And honesty, he realized, was where healing lived. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, "Not for me, but for the man who carried his pain in silence and still chose kindness." One click can be your way of saying, "I saw you. I felt this." The next morning, Ethan walked Lily to school. She waved until he was out of sight. He stood there a moment longer, letting the ordinary beauty of it sink in. Sometimes, the greatest transformations didn't happen under spotlights or in headlines. They happened when someone ordinary chose courage over comfort, when a voice spoke up instead of staying quiet, when forgiveness didn't arrive all at once, but came slowly, wrapped in boundaries and grace. Ethan Carter never asked to be extraordinary. He just refused to disappear. And in doing so, he proved something quietly powerful. That dignity doesn't come from titles. That worth isn't erased by hardship. And that even the smallest voice, spoke at the right moment, can change everything. The rain stopped. The city breathed on. And somewhere between who he was and who he'd become, Ethan smiled, knowing that hope hadn't rescued him. He had chosen it.